talk is going to be a little different because I apologize. I actually lost my talk a couple days ago when my computer failed, and with it, and I had to reconstruct this last night with the help of my daughter on it. It's going to be based primarily on National Research Council project, which is New Seismicity Potential Energy Technologies. This thing just came out. Okay, this is good. If you need any of these, Elizabeth is over there. She'll tell you where to get them with National Academy. This this was just a great experience. We'll go into that. But the conversation today just had me thinking on so many other things that I think relate to all of this. It's amazing. You guys all have almost the same experiences that I've had on this. And one of the things I want to point out with ethics, you all got to think about this, is how many of you notice cheaters in school or at work or doing something like that? Everybody, right? Maybe not. Okay, everybody's seen it. Did you report these people? Okay, good, good. They should be. Most of the time, this doesn't happen. Okay, so let me start with something unethical I did. Okay, I had a guy who was an old geologist. He came in. I was doing Alcus Perillo study, which is fault hazard studies in California. I was evaluating his work, and he came in, and the guy was entirely lost. He had no idea. He thought he was in Monterey Formation. He was in the Pico Formation. He was just totally lost on where he was. And here's what I did unethical. I called the people that he did a report for and said, please fire him and hire a reasonable geologist. Okay, now, what was I supposed to do in that case? Anybody? I was supposed to call the Board of Registration. He was a registered geologist, and he was not capable of practicing anymore. Okay, but his name never came up again on the other thing, but the thing is I felt sorry for the poor guy. He really did give it a real effort, but he was just totally lost. So now I've admitted I've done bad stuff, and that's it. Now, as I get on this talk, this is the talk that I'm supposed to give for APG, hydraulic fracture and earthquakes. Ethically, how do we move forward and do the right thing? So great. What does that have to, this is with fracking and stuff. This is really an odd sort of situation I've got here, because I thought I had the best talk to cure insomnia, but I really didn't. The talk everybody finds is interesting. With this National Academies, I can't believe everywhere I go, I have pros and cons. The people all get together, and we give the talk, and I'll have some very strong people on the other side. But then they go, "Yeah, that's all pretty reasonable. This is really not such a controversial thing." And what made it not controversial? Okay, the fact that it was done fairly and equally from both sides. It was based on fact and statement, and a group of people that came together to do this. And I really have to commend the National Academies for being able to put together a group like this, because, wow, it was a great learning experience for me. So now I've got to make sure I can enter into the thing. This is the original talk that I go around the country giving on it. You can see that it's a year old. I have to stick with that year ago on that. Okay, so move forward. APG says I need to stick this on here because they're going to pay for my travel expenses. And that's very important. Okay. Now, this is the abstract I've submitted. Don't try to read it. It's just there for that. Now I have to get started with the actual talk here. This has come out by a guy in the National Academy. Okay, in Pennsylvania, the closer you live to a well used to hydraulically fracture groundwater shale for natural gas, the more likely it is your drinking water will be contaminated. Robert Johnson from Duke University and Proceeds, National Academy of Science. Wow, that sounds pretty sick. But it's interesting. I got this out of Scientific American. And Mark Pichetti of Scientific American points out that Jackson's work does not prove. It also says that the oil industry's denials undermine their own credibility. The point here is that where you're drilling into the Marcellus, might there be some sort of coals above it that could get into the groundwater, get coal bed methane or something else? Okay, that wasn't studied in this thing. It's interesting that this makes the news just all the time. And in fact, so all the time that the local newspaper in Long Beach, just before I left, had this thing, Fractured State, and the big controversy on this. Now, the interesting thing is they dealt with people on both sides, tried to be fair, but they dealt with two uninformed people on both sides. And this thing came out just rather remarkable. And if you'd like to see it, I've got a copy of it with me so you can take a look at it. This is where the cell phone comes in real nice. You can take a picture and make a slide. Okay, so let me get on to the ethics thing, and um, I'll leave this up here for you to look at. I teach petroleum geology in grad school at USC, University of Southern California. In the last couple of years, I've had some rather interesting cheating problems. For example, and I ask you because there's a lot of professors here. Okay, have you handed out a test to the students, and when you pick up the test, it's a different test from the student? Has anybody else had this happen? Okay, I have had this happen. Okay, so I get a different test back. It's one of my tests, but it's not the one I gave. And I go, that's interesting. I get a different one back. So I reported that this is an irregularity to the administration, and I'm ready for the next test. So the next test, I go to the department secretary and I say, hey, here's my thumb drive. You take it. My test is on there. That's the test I'm using. Now, let me explain something. I teach in distance education network. My students are all over the world at any given time. So currently I have 45 students. They're everywhere. They're in Saudi Arabia. They're in Germany. They're in South America. They're here. Okay, so they are all over. Most of my students are overseas. So I give her the thing. I say, I'm going to do the test again. Now, I mark all my tests before I'm in. I know we know all the tricks where we can change the questions, orders, and stuff like that. And I do it again. Turn out, and guess, what do you think happened? I got another one of my tests back. This wasn't the same one. So I demanded an investigation. The department did an investigation, and they had the department secretary evaluate it, and they found no problem whatsoever, which really, really upset me. I don't know about you guys, but that really bothered me. So this round, my next class after that one, go in again. I've got 5 students cheating, very substantially cheating. And I changed the test rather dramatically. I made part of it a take-home test. I warned them. I said, here's a take-home test. You're going to get to do this. Since everything I say is videoed, everything on it, I told them, you do not copy or work with other students on this. This is your test. You take it home. You can look at all the books you want, but no talking to other students or working with them on it. And I said that and wrote it on the test. And by the way, some of the teachers are now putting legal statements on the test about you can't, all this stuff, which is totally ridiculous. They missed the point of the students. And off it went. I came back, 5 came back with exactly the same answer, exactly the same graphics on the computer. They had copied from each other and didn't see a problem with it. Of course, I challenged this and said, no, you have a problem. You were told not to do this. Well, we looked at it, we watched the video, and you said that, but we misunderstood it. How did you misunderstand that? Well, we just misunderstood it. So that led me to think, wow, this is really a problem. So I talked with the department chair, and says, well, you have to understand, they all have to have a 3.0 or better average, and a lot of them are here getting money, so they have to have that. They're going to do whatever it takes, and that's really. And I go, that's not acceptable. Okay, you've had a reputation at this school. You've got to maintain this reputation by putting out good students who are straight and honest. And of course, I lectured each of the students on this. And they said, well, okay, you can let them off now with a. And I said, no. They all had their grades lowered. Now, I don't know about you guys, but lowering a grade at least is minimal, rather substantially. Okay? When I was in school, I think I'd have been thrown out, but that was not an acceptable thing. But these foreign students often don't see this as a problem. They say this is fine, this is what they need to do. And I think the school gets money from this, and they don't see it as big of a problem as I do. But I depend on these people for the future of energy. And if they're goofing up now, they're going to goof up later. Let me give you an example from my own life. When I first started my career, right at school, I started a job. I worked at the State Lands Commission. We got a job there where they said, okay, we want you to, my boss told me to evaluate the deeper horizons and do stuff. I did it. I did these reports on each of the zones, gave them back to him, didn't worry about it. One day, his boss's secretary came storming down the hall, you're in trouble. I'm going to fix you. You're going to go in there. The boss is furious. The boss comes up and he said, is this report yours? And I go, oh, okay, I take it. And I look at it and glance at it. And I notice that it's my supervisor's name on there. My name's not on there. I leaf through it, and I look at the conclusions, and the conclusions have been changed a little bit. And I said, yeah, well, it looks like my report, but it's changed. He said, what do you mean changed? This is the final report. And it just a second. So I went back to my office, came back, showed him my report was different. The guy had changed it. What? And needless to say, this guy didn't last very much longer in this job. Okay. What he had been doing was just having me do the reports. He would go through it, make sure it's okay, put his name on it, and felt just quite ethically that was not a problem whatsoever. That was, what he did with it. And there was no need to mention me because I was a lowly person on it. So this type of stuff really gets you going on stuff. Now, I have a whole bunch of these kind of stories, including the Glamour magazine story, and I worked with Aaron Brockovich also. But we will do that with some other stuff. Okay, I do have to get back to this project is absolutely incredible, and part of what makes it incredible is National Academies. And I'm speaking to the choir here, right? You guys are all in full agreement, right? No. Okay. In 1863, congressional charter signed by President Lincoln authorized a non-government institution, top scientists. That means this thing is 150 years old, but I don't think they started right away. I'm not sure when they started. So Elizabeth, remember when they started? It was a few years after that. Okay. Okay. But and they can enlist the nation's foremost scientists to address the scientific and technical aspects of society's most pressing problems. Another really good idea. Okay. Now this thing is amazing. There are hundreds of committees convened to answer these questions. Independent advice is provided and sponsors. Now, they didn't fund this thing. They said, oh, you got to find money from different places. Normally, it's different agencies within the government. They can come from, as I understand, most anywhere. Okay, the data is gathered publicly and deliberated in private. Okay, people are selected on these committees because they can be independent of where they work. They're neutral. They have been vetted by a number of people. I think that is really good. The reports are independent and objective, and I can tell you this report is very independent and objective. I really learned a lot, and I suspect the other committee members did too. Okay, now, before I jump into the talk, this is something I just added last night that I thought, give you just a feeling for it. So since 1947, over 1 million wells have been hydraulically fractured. Now, this isn't the normal sort of set, of frac job you're thinking of the Marcellus. This is any kind of frac job. Actually, they were before that. Remember, they used to drop the torpedoes down the hole with nitroglycerin and frac them. Okay, these things, a few of those trucks still exist. I saw one in Midland recently. Since the start of 2011, nearly 1,000 wells. And by the way, I picked this up at the American Groundwater Trust meeting. It was held in California. It was a very mixed meeting with people on both sides of the issue. 1,000 wells have been hydraulically fractured in California without a single instance of fractured fluid, wastewater leaking out and contaminating surrounding groundwater. Let me point something out here that our industry is very poor at, is explaining the science logically to the public, okay? And there's an outgoing fear of it that is absolutely remarkable. Locally, we had the company that was going to go in, do some frac jobs, go in, and they were going to go in the area. They had a public information meeting, and the anti-fracking people came out and beat the crud out of them. Really, really did a lot of damage to them, and they backed off. Fracking. Well, fracking was part of their original plans to go into that. They needed to explain it. So they have a problem. Understand, if I'm going to do a frac job, I've got a lot of sand, and even if I put it in high pressure, picture a syringe going in, and you squirt it in hard and fast, it doesn't make the pop because there's not enough volume to get up there. People have to understand that. The industry has not explained that. But the other thing for this talk that's important is moment magnitude is used for earthquakes. It's the energy released, not the amount of shaking. It's Mercalli scale would be the shaking. But a magnitude -2 earthquake is 1 meter of rupture. Magnitude 3, 15 acres. Magnitude 4, 1/2 square mile with a rupture displacement of 0.4 inches. Okay, we're not talking about a lot of movement underground on these things. Magnitude 5 is 4.2 square miles with a rupture of 1.8 inch. And the magnitude 8, that's a rupture the size of Delaware. You notice there's a logarithmic scale for each one that goes up to 32. So we're talking about lots of difference between these guys and these guys. Okay, the minimum felt events are down in this range. So this is just put stuff into perspective. It'll help with the rest of the talk. Okay, so there's a number of seismic events that have happened all over the place. Basel, Switzerland was a major one that got things going. It was an enhanced geothermal system, magnitude 3.4. So these are little shakers that are happening in Switzerland. Dallas-Fort Worth Airport area, magnitude 3.3. Remember how small that was? It wasn't very much. Blackpool, England, this got things going. Look at the magnitude of this. The locals could just barely feel that. Okay, so public concern about these kinds of events prompted Senator Bingaman to ask Secretary Chao. Bingaman is from New Mexico, to have a study on the geoseismicity and energy technologies. And here's the statement of our task, and I'm going to just step through this because I have a few other things that'd be fun talking about. Okay, here's the overview, introduction to seismicity and its history, types and causes. We're going to go through each of the different things, steps towards best practices, which is very good, findings and gaps and stuff. And this will look a little repetitious at the end, but it's really very important. Here's what we did. We had a number of meetings, you can see different places, and the thing finally got printed this summer. I don't know the exact date, so I just put summer. That's okay. Okay, types and causes of geoseismicity. Okay, impoundment of large reservoirs behind dams. We have a good case of this in California where a dam burst that Mulholland had built. Controlled explosions related to mining and construction, underground nuclear tests, energy technologies that involve injection or withdrawal of fluids from the subsurface. Okay, types and causes of geoseismicity, fluid withdrawal, energy development. The general mechanisms are well understood. Boy, when I went onto the committee, I'd have said, no, they're not that well understood. They are very well understood. Now, it's a very complex problem. That's the tricky part. Okay, so we're unable to accurately predict the occurrence or magnitude of such events due to the lack of comprehensive data on complex natural rock systems and the lack of validated predictive models. So we got the types and causes. Okay, geoseismicity is caused in most cases by a change in the pore fluid pressure and or the change in the stress of the subsurface in the presence of faults with specific properties and orientations, a critical state of stress in the crust. So I've got something pushing down. I've got a coefficient of friction here. It's not a lubricant. It's going in there, it's greasing it. It doesn't change the coefficient of friction. What I'm doing is changing stress by increasing the pore pressure, and then it raises up. And if there's something moved this way or that way, then it comes out. Basically, we follow the law there. So it has the most direct correlation in regard to induced seismicity is the net fluid balance. So if I keep the fluid balanced, it stays the same, or if I reduce it, it will most of the time stay the same, but in the cases like where I work in the Wilmington field, it will be different. Okay? So that's important. Additional factors may also influence. So where it is, how proximity to wells through this, or any number of things will impact it. Okay, these are the different energy technologies that we looked at. Okay, geothermal, oil and gas, wastewater, carbon capture and sequestration. Okay, geothermal, you've got different types, vapor-dominated, liquid-dominated, enhanced geothermal systems. These are getting a bit fancier. These tend to be in California, which is kind of cool. We got to see some pretty cool places. Okay, this is different from energy technologies because of temperature. Temperature is very important here. Oil and gas. We got oil and gas withdrawal, enhanced oil recovery, hydraulic fracturing for shale gas development. And oil and gas operators attempt to balance the fluid volumes, okay, to produce fluid injection into and maintain reservoir pressure. So you don't want to deplete the pressure. You don't want to make it too much. You want to get everything just right. Okay, wastewater disposal. Okay. Fluid from flowback from hydraulic fracturing and waste fluid produced from conventional oil and gas production in the United States is over 800 billion gallons per year. It's interesting that a very effective frac job, you're going to frac into the formation. You want your frac fluid to stay into the formation. Otherwise, you might be actually pushing material in to plug your formation. Your frac job will not be near as effective. Okay, so it's an important thing that one of the good things that you can tell is if you're starting producing a lot of that fluid back out, you didn't get as good a frac job as you wanted. Okay, more than 1/3 of the volume is managed through underground injection for permanent disposal in Class 2 disposal permitted by the EPA and states with delegate authority. Okay, carbon capture and sequestration. So far, these are all kind of small things. CO2 can be captured, liquefied, injection into various kinds of formations for storage. I'm working on the DOE project in the offshore right now trying to designate an area they could possibly inject into. The area is very large, and in my mind, it looks like almost an impossible project. Small-scale commercial projects, okay, offshore Norway, Algeria, onshore Nigeria, inject about 1 million metric tons per year. And of course, there's big ones on the way here we're looking at. Future projects expect to inject much greater than 1 million metric tons. This is interesting. Daily, you inject a whole lot, but in the long run, in the area, it's a small amount. Now, this one actually jumps from place to place to place to place as you do your frac jobs. Okay, carbon capture and sequestration, you're injecting into the same place. The amount injected daily might be only this much, but it way adds up over time. Okay, keep that in mind. Wastewater, same thing. It's a lower volume daily, but over time, it just continues to grow. Geysers, it disappears on you. Okay, and basal, you can see it there. So we're looking at annual fluid volumes injected, the highest proposed CCS projects at 13 million cubic meters, and Class 2 wastewater well at 4 million cubic meters. And of course, I mentioned that not so much. So this is a rather interesting chart. This is just absolutely kind of fun part of the whole thing. This gives you a whole bunch of numbers all over the place we can look at. But for each thing, so we got the number of current projects, number of historical felt events, number of historical events over magnitude 4. Okay, see how few these are? Okay, locations of events. This tells the states where they're occurring. Okay, vapor-dominated geysers, lots of events, but not too many big events. Okay, liquid-dominated. Okay, not near as many events, maybe one here. Okay, enhanced geothermal. Okay, pilot project, a couple per year, nothing big yet. You notice where these are? They're all in California. Okay, oil and gas withdrawal. 6,000 wells, 20 sites. We've got 5 potential historical events up there. Secondary recovery water flood, 108,000 wells, 18 sites, 3 events. Okay, enhanced oil recovery, 13,000 wells, nothing. Okay, hydraulic fracturing, oil and gas, 35,000 wells. Now, I have to admit these numbers have changed. Okay, since this report finished, there have been a couple events that have changed this. Okay, wastewater disposal, wells class 2, 30,000 wells. Okay, number of historical events. These, okay, you can see here, and there's been a little change here also. Carbon capture and storage, nothing known on that because it's way too new. Okay, potential for reduced seismicity summary points. Okay, the rate of injection or extraction is very important. The volume and temperature of the injected or extracted fluids is important. Pore pressure, permeability, the relevant geologic layers, the faults, fault properties, fault locations. This means orientations and stuff also. Crustal stress conditions, distance from the injection point. It's interesting. In one case, we had, it's Paradise Valley, where injection went in over here, and the earthquakes occurred way over there. And injection went in here, earthquakes way over there. And it was a fault line that went across the valley to the side. And the fluids went in it and down, and that's where we had events. Okay, and of course there's the length of time. Okay, so the net fluid balance, the total balance of fluid introduced or removed, appears to have the most direct consequence on changing the pore pressure in the subsurface over time. Energy technology projects designed to maintain balance between the amount of fluid being injected and the amount of fluid being withdrawn, such as geothermal and most oil and gas development, may produce fewer induced seismic events than technologies that do not maintain the fluid balance. So that would be carbon capture and sequestration and maybe class 2 injection wells. Okay, study findings. These are the areas. We'll look at the study findings on each of these. Okay, geothermal. Geoseismicity appears to be related to both the net fluid balance considerations and the temperature changes. In other words, you're quenching. You throw a lot of cold water into the reservoir, you're going to get some little events. You throw a lot more, you may get some bigger events. Okay, different forms of geothermal resource development appear to have differing potential for producing felt seismic events. High pressure EGS, okay, could lead to events that could be exceptionally large, okay, but we don't know that because we're going to control it. A temperature change associated with the geothermal development of the hydrothermal resources has also induced felt seismicity. Okay, oil and gas. Generally, withdrawal associated with conventional oil and gas recovery has not caused significant seismic events. However, several major earthquakes have been associated with conventional oil and gas withdrawal. Let me point out in the Wilmington oil field, they drew the pressures down rather substantially and had some events that sheared oil wells. I was in charge of that section for a while, but many years after it happened, and we were maintaining reservoir pressures. We've done so ever since and had no events since. It was interesting that people on this committee pointed out that the numbers that were given by the guys at CalTech were altogether wrong for our Wilmington oil field, and that really what had happened there was quite different. And that is written up somewhat in this. It's the only place that there's actually a change in published literature on that. Okay, relative to the large number of waterflood projects for secondary recovery, the small number of documented instances of felt-induced seismicity suggests that such projects pose small risk for events that would be of concern to the public. The committee did not identify any documented felt-induced seismic events associated with the EOR tertiary recovery. The potential for induced seismicity is low. I understand there might be one or two that we have missed, but they're minor. Okay, the process of hydraulic fracturing a well as presently implemented for shale and gas recovery does not pose a high risk for induced felt seismic events. That is the feeling of the committee on that. Roughly 35,000 wells have been hydraulically fractured for shale gas development to date in the United States. Only one case demonstrated induced seismicity from hydraulic fracturing for shale gas, and it was documented, and that's it worldwide. It's Blackpool. And you saw that that was a very small event. Induced seismicity potential waste or energy wastewater disposal. Okay, there are roughly 30,000 Class II wastewater disposal wells, water from energy production. Very few felt seismic events reported as either caused by or likely related to these events. Okay, rare cases of wastewater injection have produced seismicity or seismic events, typically less than magnitude 5. Now, since this report, there have been a couple things. There was Youngstown, Ohio, and there's some stuff in Oklahoma that occurred that caused some interesting changes. The operator in Youngstown is working with the University of Southern California on having his thing studied, but basically he went into Canadian Shield rock that had no permeability into it. Put the pressure, it was not a wise decision. Okay. High injection volumes may increase pore pressure, and in proximity to existing faults could lead to induced seismic event. Guess what? That's what happened at Youngstown. Okay, the area of potential influence from injection wells may extend over several square miles. Okay, a good case is Rocky Mountain Arsenal. Okay, this happened just outside of Denver. I think it's about 6 miles from Denver, where the Army put a lot of fluid into the ground, very deep. But it also was in tight crystalline rock that had no permeability. So the end result was over time it would build up and start fracturing. Even when they shut the thing down, you had small earthquakes, again, usually less than 3, that happened for a long time. Okay, and the next one is induced seismicity may continue for months or to years after. And again, that's Rocky Mountain Arsenal is a good example of that. Evaluating the potential for induced seismicity in the location and design of injection wells is difficult because there are no cost-effective ways to locate faults and measure in situ stresses. This gets us down to this idea that we need baseline studies all over the country. We need baseline because we need to know what the geology is in areas. We need to find out what the seismicity. We need to monitor the microseismicity. Right now, microseismicity is kept very close to the companies that are doing it, and there is no large database set up to share this with the world. I think this would help a lot. If you look at their book, you'll see there's stress maps over the whole country on it. And on the stress maps, it gives you an idea of what to study. Also, what happens typically is you don't have seismic stations in an area, so you can't tell actually very accurately where these events are. Since we've done this, there have been a couple new ideas that have come forward that can actually predict these things with some real accuracy, even based on very few seismic stations. So there's some new technology that is developing. Okay, carbon capture and sequestration. The only long-term, 14 years, is commercial CO2 project, the Sleipner field, offshore Norway. This is one Scientific American did an article on a number of years ago you guys probably saw. Okay, extensive seismic monitoring has not indicated any significant induced seismicity. Again, this is not that big a project in the big sense of things. Okay, so basically there's no experience with the proposed injection volumes of liquid CO2 in the large-scale sequestration project, greater than 1 million metric tons per year. If the reservoirs behave in a similar manner to oil and gas fields, these large volumes have the potential to increase the pore pressure over large areas and may have the potential to cause significant seismic events. Okay, also, CO2 has the potential to react with the host rock or adjacent rock and cause mineral precipitation or dissolution. The effects of these reactions on the potential seismic events is not understood. So we don't know what's going to happen here. Hopefully there'll be some studies on this that somebody else can carry forward. But our committee felt that this was something that was just kind of a little bit scary and something we should keep an eye on. Okay, government. Responsibility for oversight of activities can be caused that can cause induced seismicity is dispersed among a bunch of agencies. Okay? Now, recent events and things that have happened, the agencies have worked very, very well together. Okay? And currently, the EPA has the primary regulatory responsibility for fluid injection under the Safe Drinking Water Act, but this does not include induced seismicity. Okay? The USGS has the capability, expertise to do it, but their mission needs to be changed a little bit. Now, I'm skipping over a little bit of this as we go. We have some proposed actions that people get together and work on stuff. Okay, they need to have money to do this. We have to have the right people work with to get the money on this. Okay, methods do not exist to implement assessments of the hazards. Again, we need programs, money, people to back this. Okay, net pore pressure, in-situ stresses, information on faults is very important. We need background seismicity. We need baseline stuff. This is where we're going. Gross statistics. Okay, so some proposed actions are get some methodology, develop it. Okay, develop it for quantitative probabilistic hazard assessments of induced seismic risk. Okay, the goals in developing the methodology would be to make assessments before the operations begin in areas with a known history of felt seismicity. Update the assessments in response to observed induced seismicity. Data related to the fluid injection, well locations, and everything should be collected by state and federal agencies and made available in areas of high density structures and population. Understand, you got to be sensitive there. People are living there. The rules have to be a little tougher there because you're going to create some problems. Okay, DOE protocol for EGS provides a reasonable initial model for dealing with induced seismicity that can serve as a template for other energy technologies. Now, this matrix style model does something that's very interesting. Basically, you get a project going, you get the thing started, and you say, okay, you guys got the green light. Go ahead, start developing. And if some problem comes up, you say, whoa, guys, yellow light, slow down, pull back on this somewhat, let's study it, see what happens. You know, if it's injecting a lot, pull back, and, just do it. If things come back okay again, then you go back in with it. And you can go back to green light. If it's not good, red light, you stop the thing. They know that up front. That's part of the risk of the project. You can stop the thing right away on it. So that's a very, very important thing. Best practices, what we should look for on this stuff, how we should monitor this, that's where we're going. That's where it should be. Okay, so study research recommendations. We need to collect field and laboratory data on active seismic events possibly caused by energy development on specific aspects of rock system at energy development sites. For example, on fault fracture properties, orientations, crustal stress, injection rates, fluid volumes, and pressures. It's important here, understand that if you've got a state large like Oklahoma, very few seismic stations monitoring there, and you have an event, is that event going to be close to an injection well? The answer is yes. Did that injection well cause it? Maybe not. It needs to be studied. You need to understand that. Okay, we need to develop instrumentation to measure the stuff. We got to do good hazard and risk assessment. We got to develop models, including codes that link geomechanical models with models for reservoir fluid flow and earthquake simulation. All this costs money. Okay, conduct research on carbon capture and sequestration. That's important stuff because we really don't know enough on that. So, in conclusion, although the induced seismic events have not resulted in a loss of life or major damage in the United States, their effects have been felt locally, and they raise some concern about the additional seismic activity and its consequences in areas where energy development is ongoing or planned. Further research is required to better understand and address the potential risks associated with induced seismicity. Okay, this is the committee. That is a very, very brief version of the induced seismicity talk. I hope to cover that on that. But what's important here, and it's critically important, is that this was a very, very controversial subject. When I went on to this committee, I said, oh gosh, you know, we are really in trouble with this guy. When we've done this, everybody that sees this and hears it says there's an understanding that's going on here and a reasonable course of action. If we follow this reasonably, we will get there and go with it. And what's remarkable is how well this has been taken. Normally, again, this group is here for ethics. Normally, the group there is very, very interested in the induced seismicity and the hydrofracking, and they have a lot of questions on that. And it gives a very, very good, fair, and so far, very reasonable discussion. I've had several people ask, "Oh boy, you had some people really jump on a nail," and I said, "Not one, not one." Everybody has said that this was so fair and balanced that they thought this is the way we should go with all the other aspects of hydraulic fracturing. So, are there any questions on this?